The static is the only thing that answers the biting wind. A loose cable whips against the rusted metal of the comms tower, a frantic, desperate rhythm in the twilight. My heat suppressant patch is failing, its green light stuttering to a weak, final orange. It's my last one. Suddenly, a shadow detaches from the wreckage below, moving with an unnatural silence. A figure now stands at the base of the ladder, his form a solid black void against the dying sky. His voice cuts through the wind, low and sharp as shattered glass. "That beacon you're trying to fix?" It answers to me. "Touch it again, and I'll use your spine to tune it." But the man who found me in the skeletal remains of the old world wasn't a random tyrant. He was the ghost of a promise my bloodline had tried, and failed, to escape. He moved like the stories said he did. No sound. No wasted motion. I heard the groan of the metal ladder, one rung at a time, each step a measured threat climbing toward me. I clutched the ghost beacon to my chest, a heavy, cold cube of pre-collapse tech that was supposed to be my salvation. Now it just felt like a tombstone. The wind was a razor over my exposed skin, and I could feel my own body beginning its quiet, catastrophic betrayal. The failing patch on my arm wasn't just a warning. It was a timer. When his head cleared the lip of the platform, the last of the light caught the line of his jaw. Alistair Thane, the warden of the haven. His face was all harsh angles and brutal stillness. He didn't look at me, not at first. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, scanned the jury-rigged power cell and the diagnostic tools I'd laid out. He didn't seem to be breathing. It was just a feeling I had. The way the air itself seemed to go still and thin around him. A pressure drop. That was the S-Class of him, they said. A presence so dominant it could suppress the world around it. I believed them. "You have something that belongs to me," he said again, his voice flat. This time it was not a threat, but a statement of fact, which was somehow worse. His gaze finally landed on me, and then on the beacon in my arms. My throat was dust. "Scavenger's rights," I managed to rasp, the words sounding pathetic even to my own ears. "Found is kept. That's the law of the wastes." A sound left him. Not a laugh. It was colder than that. The sound of metal scraping against bone. "I am the law." He took a step onto the platform, and the whole structure swayed. He didn't even notice. He moved with the kind of predatory grace that meant he'd never been off balance a day in his life. He cornered me against the central mast, his body blocking the last of the fading world. His scent was nothing. A void. Chemically suppressed to an unnerving perfection. It was the olfactory equivalent of a black hole, drawing everything in, giving nothing back. He reached for the beacon. I flinched back, tightening my grip. It was a stupid, instinctual thing to do, and it cost me. His hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. His grip was iron. Not hot, not cold, just absolute. I felt the bones in my wrist grind together, a quiet protest against immovable force. With a simple, almost dismissive twist, he pried the beacon from my hands. My fingers were numb, useless. But as his skin touched mine, a jolt went through me. A strange, crackling energy, like the biostatic from a failing power grid. It wasn't just me. I saw it in his eyes. A flicker, a momentary disruption in that perfect, frozen calm. His eyes narrowed, a subtle shift that felt like a tectonic plate moving somewhere deep beneath the earth. He held my wrist a second longer than he needed to, his thumb brushing against my skin. Then he did something that turned my blood to ice. He lifted my wrist, not looking at the beacon he'd just taken, but at me. He sniffed the air between us, a short, sharp intake of breath. I saw his nostrils flare. He was searching for something. I held my breath, praying the scent blockers in my system, the faint trail of a beta's neutral signature I'd cultivated for years, would hold. Praying the rising tide of my own biology, the sweet, damning scent of an omega on the verge of heat, was still locked away. "Interesting," he murmured. The word was a scalpel. He finally let go of my wrist, and I stumbled back, cradling it against my chest. His gaze drifted down to the back of my other hand, the one not clutching my bruised wrist. His eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on the scar there, a pale, crescent-shaped mark just above the knuckles. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not recognition. Something older. Something I couldn't place. He turned without another word, the ghost beacon held loosely in one hand. "You're coming with me," he said over his shoulder. It wasn't a question. He started back toward the ladder. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You have the beacon. You don't need me." He paused, one hand on the top rung of the ladder. He looked back at me, and in the deep twilight, his eyes seemed to glow with a flat, merciless light. "I have the device," he said. "But you are the anomaly. And I do not tolerate anomalies in my territory." He descended into the darkness. I had no choice but to follow. Below, nestled in the skeletal wreckage of a fallen skyscraper, was an armored vehicle so black it swallowed the light. He gestured for me to get in, and as I scrambled past him, he reached out and tore the failing suppressant patch from my arm. The weak orange light died. He looked at the patch in his hand, then at me. "Let's see what you really are," he said, and the door slammed shut, plunging us into a suffocating, clinical silence. They put me in a room that was all white. White walls, white floor, white ceiling. Even the single cot and the small table were made of some sterile white polymer. There was no window, just a diffuse, shadowless light that came from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't a room for a person. It was a room for a specimen. A gilded cage at the top of the world, in the highest spire of the haven. And I was the thing inside it. My pack, my tools, my jacket, all gone. They'd taken everything, including the precious, failing suppressant patch Alistair had ripped from my arm. Without it, I was defenseless against my own body. A low-grade fever had started to creep through me, a familiar and dreaded warmth spreading from my core. It was the first sign. My body, so long held in chemical check, was starting to wake up, starting to remember what it was. And soon, the air itself would bear witness. The scent of a beta is neutrality, a blank space. Mine had always been a careful forgery of sage and ozone, wild and free, but I had learned to smother it, to present only the blankness. Now, I could feel the first true notes of it beginning to bleed into the filtered air of the room. Faint, but not for long. I was pacing, my bare feet silent on the seamless floor, when the door hissed open. It was him, Alistair Thane. He moved into the center of the white room and made it feel small and cluttered. He was holding the ghost beacon. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his gaze clinical, detached. I stopped pacing and stood my ground, trying to project a defiance I didn't feel. The fever was making me dizzy, my own sent a faint, treasonous perfume in my nostrils. He had to smell it. An S-Class Alpha's senses were legendary. "The air scrubbers in this room report a change in your biosignature," he said finally. His voice was as sterile as the room. A significant increase in pheromonal output. Specifically, omega-class esters. "You are not a beta." I laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. I was crawling around a collapsed reactor core for a week. It's radiation sickness. It messes with your system. It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. He began to circle me. He moved with a silent, lethal purpose that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It was the walk of a predator, assessing its prey. "Lying to me is a fatal mistake for most," he said, his voice a low murmur that vibrated through the floor. "I am making an exception for you, for now, because I find myself curious." He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could feel the chill radiating from him. "Your scent," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's becoming familiar." My heart hammered against my ribs. Familiar? How could it be familiar? I had spent my entire life making sure it was invisible, unknowable. He lifted the ghost beacon, holding it in the space between us. The device, which had been inert and cold, suddenly came to life. A low hum filled the room, and a series of faint blue lights on its surface began to pulse. I stared at it, mesmerized. Then I realized, the lights were pulsing in time with my heartbeat. A frantic, terrified rhythm. Alistair watched the display, his expression unreadable. He was observing the interaction, a scientist noting the reaction between two unstable elements. He was taking notes. On me. He was using the beacon to read me, to translate my biology into data. The humiliation was a hot, coiling thing in my gut. He was stripping me down to my base components, turning my most private, vulnerable self into a series of blinking lights on a box. The fever intensified, a wave of heat washing over me so powerful it made me sway. The scent in the room bloomed, no longer faint. Wild sage and the sharp, clean smell of ozone after a lightning strike. My true scent. Unfiltered. Undeniable. Alistair's head snapped up. His eyes locked on mine. For the first time, the clinical detachment in his gaze was gone. It was replaced by something else. Something dark and possessive and frighteningly alive. He had scented me. Truly. The beta was gone. The omega was here. There you are, he whispered. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just a prisoner. I was a discovery. Hours later, the blaring started. A citywide alarm. A sound so visceral it seemed to vibrate in my bones. Red lights strobed across the white walls of my cell, painting everything in blood and shadow. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding for a completely different reason. This wasn't about me. This was something bigger. Wronger. The door to my room hissed open and slammed shut, and suddenly Alistair was there. He wasn't the cold, clinical warden from before. There was a taut, furious energy about him. He ignored me completely, striding to a section of the wall that shimmered and became a translucent terminal. His fingers flew across the holographic interface, lines of code scrolling past his face. What's happening? I asked, my voice thin. The haven is under cyber assault, he bit out, not looking at me. The city's main security protocols flashed on the screen in angry red warnings. Breach. 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 Security lockdown initiated. We're locked in here until it's over. Just my luck. Trapped in a box with the apex predator while the world burned outside. I watched him work, his movements precise and brutal, trying to force the system to obey. But for every firewall he patched, two more sprung open. The viral code was an infestation, a plague. It was elegant. It was sophisticated. And it was starting to look familiar. I crept closer, peering at the cascading lines of code. It wasn't a modern attack. The structure, the logic gates, the way it targeted the system's core firmware. I'd seen it before, in fragments of data scavenged from old-world server farms. I survived in the wastes by salvaging and reprogramming tech that was centuries old. I knew its language. I knew its ghosts. His not breaking in, I said, the words tumbling out of me. His using a pre-collapse logic bomb. It's designed to trip the kill switch on the primary server cluster. Alistair didn't turn. The system is shielded against EMPs and logic bombs. Not this one, I insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. See? It's not attacking the power grid. It's rewriting the thermal regulator protocols. It's going to make the core servers cook themselves from the inside out. You have to reboot the entire grid using a manual interrupt sequence. Now, or the whole city goes dark for good. He finally turned and looked at me. For a long moment, the only sounds were the blaring alarms and the frantic clicking of failing systems. I saw the war in his eyes, the ingrained distrust of an alpha who trusted no one, battling the cold, hard logic of a warden watching his city die. The system flashed a final, critical warning. Thermal overload imminent. Desperation 1. Talk, he commanded. My mind, sharpened by years of dissecting dead tech, took over. Kill the network interface. Not disconnect. Kill it. Command line. Now. Okay, access the primary kernel. No, not through the GUI. You have to use the maintenance port command. It's older than the city. He was good. His hands moved with blinding speed, translating my frantic, complex instructions into action. It was a strange, intimate dance. My knowledge, his power. We were a single unit, fighting a ghost in his machine. The temperature warnings climbed into the red. The lights in the room flickered, died, then came back on emergency power. It's now or never, I breathed. The interrupt. You have to type the whole sequence. No mistakes. I called out the string of archaic code, a litany I'd found on a corroded data chip years ago, a relic I'd kept for no reason I could name. His fingers flew. The final character was entered. He hit enter. For one long, terrible second, everything went dead. The screen. The alarms. The lights. The world held its breath. Then, with a low, satisfying hum, the system came back. The terminal glowed with a healthy blue light. Status: stable. The alarms were silent. The attack was over. I sagged against the wall, my legs shaking, suddenly aware of the fever still thrumming through me. The room was quiet. Alistair slowly turned away from the terminal. He looked at me, and the man I saw was not the warden, not the captor, not the scientist. The cold curiosity was gone. The possessive darkness was gone. In its place was something new. Something I had never seen in an alpha's eyes when they looked at me. He was looking at me as if I were not a specimen, not an omega, not a thief, but as something else entirely. Something valuable. Something dangerous. The silence after the storm was worse than the noise. Alistair led me from the white room, not back to a cell, but upward, to the apex of the spire. To his private study. The journey was silent. He didn't touch me, but I felt the weight of his presence like a hand on my shoulder. He now knew I had a skill, a value beyond my biology. I thought that might make things better. I had not yet learned that some truths are cages, and the most dangerous ones are the ones you think are setting you free. The study was the opposite of the observation room. It was dark, paneled in wood so old it looked black, filled with the scent of aging paper and leather. A single wall was a window, a vast sheet of plexiglass looking out over the silent, sprawling city below. A storm had broken over the haven, and rain lashed against the window, turning the city lights into a glittering smear. How did you know about pre-collapse architecture? Alistair asked. He was standing by the window, his back to me, a silhouette against the lightning. My family were technicians before the fall, I said, my voice quiet in the cavernous room. We kept the knowledge alive. Scraps of it. In stories. In traditions. I lifted my hand, the one with the scar. This was our guild mark. The crescent wrench. A symbol of those who fix what is broken. He turned from the window. The look on his face, it was recognition. But it was bleak. Utterly without triumph. He walked to his desk, a massive slab of petrified wood, and placed the ghost beacon on its surface. Your family were not scavengers, Soren, he said, his voice flat. They were the Croft line of technicians. He pressed a sequence into the side of the beacon. The device hummed, and a column of pale blue light shot up from it, projecting a spinning, three-dimensional document into the air between us. It was a contract. Ancient. Bound in holographic filigree. And as it slowly turned, I began to read. If you have ever had the foundations of your life turn to sand in a single instant, you know what I felt. The words were a language of law and biology, ruthless and precise. It was a pact, signed generations ago between Thane and Croft. Sanctuary, resources, and protection for the Croft line. In exchange for a tithe. A blood tithe. 1 omega from each generation, to be bonded to the ruling Thane Alpha. A genetic infusion to strengthen the bloodline. The contract didn't speak of people. It spoke of assets. It spoke of breeding stock. The word cage wasn't used, but its meaning was there, in every line. My history, my identity, the stories of my ancestors surviving in the wastes, it was all a lie. We weren't survivors. We were runaways. We were fugitives from this monstrous pact. And then I saw the addendum. The list of names. Each Thane Alpha paired with a Croft Omega. The list was long. At the very end, 2 names blinked, waiting for verification. Alistair Thane. Soren Croft. My breath left my body in a ragged gasp. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle the sound that was trying to claw its way out of my throat. My eyes were burning, but I wouldn't cry. I would not give him that. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I clenched them into fists, digging my nails into my palms until the pain was a sharp, grounding reality. The crescent scar on my right hand stood out, pale and stark. Not a symbol of a trade. A brand. I haven't been hunting a thief, Alistair said. His voice was devoid of any emotion, heavy as a shroud. He was not a victor. He was an executioner, reading a sentence that had been written centuries before either of us was born. I have been hunting for you my entire life. The pact is active, Soren. The moment you touched the beacon, you answered the call. They locked me back in the white room. It felt different now. Before, it was a prison. Now, it was a waiting room. A sterile antechamber to a life that was not my own. I was spiraling. The same four walls a dizzying testament to my absolute powerlessness. I was property. A broodmate. A genetic key for a man who looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. The fever of my suppressed heat was back with a vengeance. A sick, cloying warmth that felt like a mockery. My own body, preparing itself for the slaughter. Then, a sound. A faint crackle of static. It wasn't from the door. It was from the air itself. A cage is a cage, no matter how gilded. The voice was a purr, a silken thread in the sterile silence. It was low, intimate, and it was coming from a hidden speaker somewhere in the ceiling. Who's there? I whispered, spinning around, searching the seamless white walls. A friend, the voice cooed. Someone who thinks a person of your talents should not be treated like cattle. The warden sees you as a broodmare, a way to secure his bloodline. But I see potential. Caspian Rourke. It had to be. The warlord who had attacked the city. That beacon is more than a contract, little technician. Caspian's voice slid through the room. It's a key. A key to the entire Thane legacy system. To their power. To their wealth. Bring it to me, and I will give you something Thane never will. A choice. And as a sign of good faith, the voice turned venomously sweet. I will personally sever the bond that ties you to him. I will cut you free from his leash, forever. I stood frozen. The words a poison and a balm at once. Sever the bond. He spoke of it like it was a physical thing. A chain he could break. He's a monster, I hissed. You're no different. A low chuckle answered me. The difference, Soren, is that I'm being honest about it. And to prove my honesty. Click. The sound was quiet, but it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I turned my head slowly, my heart a stone in my chest. The door to my room. The light above it had switched from red to green. It was unlocked. An escape route. A path laid out for me by another ruthless alpha. A different kind of predator. I was standing at a crossroads in hell. Stay and be a slave to the monster I knew, bound by a fate written in my blood. Or run to the monster I didn't, trusting a promise of freedom that was almost certainly a lie. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and absolute. The green light of the door was a silent, screaming invitation. I chose a third option. The door hissed open under my hand. I didn't run. I stepped into the empty corridor and listened. The emergency lighting cast long, distorted shadows. I found what I was looking for in a fire suppression locker. A heavy, meter-long mag wrench. It was solid, dense, a tool made for breaking things. Holding it felt right. It felt like I had a voice again. I wasn't going to Caspian. And I wasn't staying for Alistair. I was going to the study. I was going to destroy the beacon. I was going to write my own ending. The corridors were a maze, but the sound of fighting guided me. Shouts. The sharp crack of pulse rifles. I found them 2 levels down, near the main transit hub. Alistair, ambushed in a service corridor. 4 of Caspian's elite soldiers, clad in black armor, had him pinned down. He was a whirlwind of brutal motion, an S-Class Alpha in his element, but he was outnumbered. He was bleeding from a cut on his temple. One of the soldiers raised his rifle, aiming for Alistair's exposed back. There was no thought, no plan, just a pure, cold instinct. I saw an exposed energy junction on the wall, its thick power conduit snaking behind a damaged panel. I hefted the mag wrench. "Hey!" I yelled. The soldier turned. His helmeted face registered me for a split second. It was all I needed. I threw the wrench with all my strength. It spun end over end and slammed into the junction. The world went white. The explosion was a deafening roar of sound and light, a massive electrical discharge that threw me back against the wall. The soldiers convulsed as 1,000 volts of raw power surged through their armored suits, then collapsed in a heap, their systems fried. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. A hand grabbed my arm, yanking me forward, pulling me behind the cover of a thick support pillar. It was Alistair. He pressed me against the cold metal, his body shielding mine. We were chest to chest, my face buried in his shoulder. The air was electric between us, charged with something more than the aftermath of the explosion. He smelled of blood, and something else. Something wild and raw. Storm and iron. His suppressants were failing. He pushed me back just enough to look at me, his hand still gripping my arm. "You came back," he said, his voice a rough, incredulous rasp. My own anger, pure and hot, finally boiled over. "I'm not your property," I snarled, shoving against his chest. He didn't budge. "But I'm not his either. And no one gets to decide my fate but me." The defiance in my voice, the fire in my eyes, it seemed to break something in him. The warden, the alpha, the man of iron control, vanished. What was left was just a man. A man looking at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. The raw, unfiltered scent of his S-Class biology flooded my senses. A possessive, territorial claim that was both terrifying and intoxicating. He leaned in. The world narrowed to the space between our lips. I could feel his breath on my skin. He was a breath away. He was going to. A deafening groan tore through the air. A massive support beam above us, damaged in the blast, buckled. With a scream of tortured metal, it crashed down in the space where we had been standing moments before, showering us in sparks and debris. The moment was shattered. He grabbed my hand, his grip no longer a captor's, but an anchor's. "Run!" he shouted, and we ran. There are moments that clarify. The chaos of running, the city tearing itself apart around us, the distant screams and the constant shudder of explosions. It all faded into a background hum. Alistair led me down, deeper and deeper into the bones of his city, his grip on my hand a grounding, undeniable fact. We weren't captor and captive anymore. We were two people running from the same fire. He brought me to the haven's heart. A vast, cavernous chamber that housed the geothermal power core. The heat was immense, the air thick with the hum of unimaginable energy. The core itself was a throbbing sphere of light, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields. "He's taken the upper levels," Alistair said, his voice grim. He hadn't let go of my hand. "He won't stop until he has the beacon." He finally released me, but only to reach into his tactical vest and pull out the cold, heavy cube of my family's damnation. He held it out to me. I didn't take it. I just stared at his outstretched hand. "You were right," he said, and the words were rough, torn from him. "It is a cage, and my bloodline built it." He looked at me then, and his eyes, those cold, winter sky eyes, were filled with a terrible, agonizing clarity. The kind of clarity that comes only when you are about to lose everything. "A cage is not a home. I will not be the man my ancestors were." My heart stopped. The roaring of the core seemed to fade into silence. He turned to a control panel near the core's containment field. His fingers began to move, initiating a sequence that made alarms blare, not with the panic of a breach, but with the cold finality of a deliberate shutdown. "This will cause a full system meltdown," he said, his voice steady over the rising sirens. "A citywide EMP. It will disable all of Caspian's tech. Their weapons, their comms, their transports. It will create a window. An hour, maybe two, of total chaos. Enough time for you to escape into the wastes." He'll be hunting me, not you. He'll be trapped here, in the dark, with the beast he came to chain. He was sacrificing his city, his home, his entire legacy. He was going to burn his kingdom to the ground. For me. To give me the freedom his ancestors had stolen from mine. The ultimate pull. An act of change so profound it rewrote every truth I thought I knew about him. He was giving me a real choice. A true choice. And it was going to cost him his life. Go, Soren, he said, not looking at me. He was looking at the core, its light growing brighter, hotter. Run. Be free. He was Alistair Thane, the Warden. The S-Class Alpha who had cornered me on a rusted tower and threatened to use my spine for parts. And he was about to die for me. I did not run. If you have ever been given a gift so costly it would break you to accept it. You know what I mean. Freedom bought with his life wasn't freedom. It was just a different kind of cage. As the final overload sequence began, the countdown timer flashing in stark red numbers on the panel, he closed his eyes, ready to meet his end. That was when I moved. I grabbed the heavy mag wrench I'd retrieved from the corridor floor. I swung it, not at the panel, but at the side of his head. It was a sickening, hollow thud. He crumpled without a sound, a dead weight against me. I'm sorry, I whispered, dragging his unconscious body toward a maintenance hatch I'd spotted when we first entered. It was a pre-collapse design, shielded, meant for engineers to survive a core breach. He was heavy, an impossible weight. But terror gives you a strength you don't know you possess. I hauled him into the small, dark space and slammed the heavy steel door just as the countdown hit 0. The world outside the viewport went white. I felt more than heard the detonation. A deep, soul-shaking vibration that resonated through the floor, through my bones, through my teeth. It was the sound of a city dying. Then, silence. A profound, absolute silence. And darkness. When Alistair woke up, it was to the low, humming light of the shelter's emergency power. I was sitting on the floor, tending to the gash on his temple where I'd hit him. He groaned, his hand flying to his head. You should have run, he whispered. His voice was weak, his S-Class biology reeling from the EMP's aftereffects and the blunt force trauma. I shook my head, my hands still gentle as I cleaned the wound. I reached beside me and picked up the ghost beacon. It was cool to the touch. My ancestor wasn't just running, I said softly. I didn't understand until I held this, knowing what it was. He was a technician. He didn't just run. He fixed things. I turned the beacon over in my hands, feeling for the seams I now knew must be there. And I found it. A hidden panel, no bigger than my thumb. I pressed it. The beacon's light changed, shifting from the cold blue of the contract to a warm, golden glow. It projected a new document. A schematic. A modification. He didn't just steal it to hide it. I explained, my voice barely a whisper in the tiny shelter. He modified it. The beacon was designed to use our two bloodlines' genetic codes to create a resonance lock, the bond. But he added a new function. A feedback loop. A secondary command sequence. I pointed to the schematic. 2 options were clearly displayed. One, labeled Enforce. The other, Shatter. It can be used to finalize the bond, I said, looking at Alistair, whose eyes were wide with a dawning, incredulous understanding. Or it can be used to overload the genetic lock, destroying the pact and freeing both bloodlines. Forever. At the cost of the device itself. He wasn't running to save himself. He was running to find a safe place to activate the release protocol. The truth settled in the small, dark space between us. A truth that reframed centuries of history. My ancestor wasn't a coward. He was a revolutionary. And Alistair's ancestors weren't just tyrants. They were men who had been chasing a cage they themselves were also trapped inside. I looked at him, the great and powerful warden, now wounded and weak in a bomb shelter beneath the ruins of his city. It was never just my cage, Alistair, I said, the words full of a strange, aching tenderness. It was yours, too. We climbed out of the shelter into a world of ashes and dawn. The spire was a broken skeleton against the pale, bruised sky. The city was dark. Silent. There were no alarms, no shouts, only the gentle whisper of the wind through shattered buildings. We were on the peak, in the ruins of his throne room. We were, for the first time, safe. I held the ghost beacon. Its golden light pulsed softly in my hand. "We can destroy it," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the stillness. "End the pact. We can both be free." Alistair looked at the device, the source of his family's power and their shame. Then he looked at me. He reached out, not to take the beacon, but to place his hand over mine, his fingers closing over the cold metal and my own skin. His touch was warm, steady. "Our ancestors made a choice for us," he said, his voice quiet, full of a strange new peace. "Now we make our own." I looked at him. He nodded. Together, our hands gripping the device, I initiated the sequence. The golden light intensified, a blinding, pure white that engulfed us. I felt a sensation that was not physical, but deeper. A tearing, as if a single, invisible thread that had been woven into the fabric of my DNA, into my very soul, had just been snapped. The light vanished. The beacon in my hand crumbled, turning to a fine, grey dust that the morning wind caught and scattered over the ruins. It was gone. The pact was broken. We were free. There was no contract, no biological imperative, no destiny. Just the two of us, standing in the rubble of a dead world. A man who was a king without a kingdom, and a man who had finally found a home. I looked at him, my heart hammering against my ribs, loud in the silence. The weight of his S-Class presence was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer a pressure, a threat of ownership. It was just a warmth, a quiet, steady certainty. "So what now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Alistair took my hand, the one that no longer held the dust of our past. His thumb brushed over the crescent scar, a gesture so gentle it made my breath catch. "Now," he said, his voice full of a feeling I knew he had never allowed himself to feel before. "We build something new. Together." He leaned down and he kissed me. It was not the fiery, possessive kiss of the alpha who had almost taken me in the corridor. It was not the desperate act of a man about to die. It was quiet. It was certain. It was the first day of the rest of our lives. A choice, freely made, in the ashes of the world that had tried to choose for us.